This is Conspirinormal.
And we are back with another guest. We're kind of like doing some local stuff tonight because we just did like a Patreon with our good friend Joel, and now we've got another fellow Nashvillian on the line, Kiki Dombrowski. Kiki, welcome to Conspirinormal.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to talk to Nashvillians.
Yeah. Do you go on a lot of podcasts and like shows like this? I think I saw that you go on. There's at least one that you're on pretty regularly, right?
Yes. One of my dearest friends, Tanya, does the Witch Daily podcast, and she lives in New Orleans. So I visit with her on her podcast a lot, and I was on some of their Spear podcasts not too long ago too. Well, that's really about it. I'm always happy to talk with anybody.
Excellent. Especially about like such strange topics like we talk about.
Yes, please.
you know, kind of. This is interesting. Kind of how this came about because I actually read an entry from Liminal Earth that you did. I read it on the show.
You did? Oh, the one about the strange sound.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Wonderful.
When we were talking to AP Strange, we didn't know it was you.
Oh.
Yeah.
I
was just like, I gotta find something from Nashville since we were talking about with him about it, and I said, oh, I found that one. I was like, that's real interesting. So I read that one, and then I think you contacted me and said that I had read it or something like that, if memory serves right. But so we read it on the show. It's been a few episodes ago, so kind of like refresh everybody's memory of like we got the source here. So kind of tell us what happened, like what was it you were feeling, like when this was.
Sure. And I'll start by saying, too, that Liminal Earth is this really incredible project that was created by two really cool people out in Seattle, Garrett Kelly and Jeremy Puma. And they created this map where basically anybody can go on and log in any unusual, supernatural, otherworldly, strange experience. I mean, anything from dreams to UFOs and everything in the middle. And so they have this wonderful project where you can become an ambassador of the area you live in. And I excitedly reached out to them and said, I'd love to be an ambassador, sign me up. And so now I'm officially the ambassador of Tennessee. So if you guys even have had like strange experiences, I really urge you to go to liminal.earth and you could submit anything. And I'm sure you hear all sorts of awesome stuff locally too. So, yeah. And so anyways, I'm from the Northeast, and a lot of my paranormal experiences happened when I lived up in the Northeast. But moving to Tennessee, I've lived in Nashville now for 11 years. So I'm at the point where I'm finally saying I'm from Nashville.
Right.
It's taken a decade. And I live on the east side of town. And, to start off with, we do live, not too far from the airport. However, we know how an airplane sounds. We know how a helicopter sounds. We know how a motorcycle sounds. Excuse me, I swear it's just allergies.
Right.
Everything's blooming outside right now. But I know that when people hear coughing, they're like, oh, are you okay?
Yeah.
So I live with my boyfriend, and we tend to be people that like to go outside, and we, like to look up at the sky and see what we see. And we are both very, very sensitive people. And the way that I remember this happening, now this isn't the only time, I wrote an entry for one time, but it's occurred a few times.
Okay.
One evening, excuse me, I'm pulling up the entry to actually kind of like jog my memory. That's it. So I said it was in February. So there are a lot of times where we'll go outside just to, enjoy outside. And this one evening in particular, we went outside and there was this heavy, heavy feeling where it almost felt like something was watching us. And this is very unusual because it's not like we live in a rural area. We live in a suburban area. But it almost felt like past the yard, past where the light went down, it felt like this dark heaviness. And it just felt like something was there, or, like there was some sort of shape-shifting thing, it's like something was like disguised as a tree and watching us, this weird feeling that we were being watched. And I remember being outside because I was with my dog, and, the sky felt very black. Like it was dark. There were no stars. It just had this sort of like boring, cloudy feeling. The interesting thing that happened was, we went back inside after this odd feeling, and it just felt like the way my boyfriend put it was that we were in a contained space with this feeling above us. It was almost like we were in a petri dish. We were under a microscope and we were being watched. So this, let me just see. This kind of also goes along with some of the other feelings that we have. There have been times where we've gone outside and we hear very strange sounds. And like I said, we live near an airport, but we know what what an airplane sounds like when it goes overhead. But there have been times where I swear it sounds like gravel, like metal scraping across gravel, or there's almost this rumble that it almost feels like it goes through your body kind of rumble. And I don't know if other people notice it or if they just think it's planes, but there have just been times where you just go outside and you just feel like you step into a different dimension. There's something watching us. There's this heavy feeling above us. There's these strange sounds. And I don't think I'm the only person that feels this way. I know that Nashville has some really interesting heavy history. It has some really interesting sights. And so I have to believe that there are other people that are hearing strange sounds or feeling, like they're under a microscope.
Can you be a little more specific with the neighborhood? Because I'm pretty familiar with East Nashville. Is there any landmarks?
Yeah, I'm in Inglewood, and I'm on the other side of Shelby Park. So do you know where Shelby Park is?
Yeah, you're like okay.
But like the other side, I'm just south of where the tornado went through. Like the tornado missed our house by about 1.5 miles.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I know.
It was pretty close to my place. It was really close to my place.
It was really shocking.
In general, I mean, from the East Bank to along the river too, I mean, we're talking about these places have been inhabited for at least 10,000 years. So I think there's a lot to it. I mean, the Stonebox grave cultures and stuff. I mean, some of these neighborhoods in East Nashville were literally just like covered in Indian graves, in the Stonebox graves from the. But yes, there's something to the ancient history, and there's definitely something to the area also that I haven't quite put a finger on. Yeah, I can totally relate.
Yeah. There, and sometimes I wonder too if it deals with the river, and you know that there's that theory that paranormal activity really loves running water.
Right.
And so just knowing that the river, it snakes, it doesn't just like go through Nashville. It snakes, it winds, it swirls around Nashville. And there are even spots in Shelby Park that to me feel different. Like you step onto, you know, maybe not the paved area, but if you go deep into Shelby Park, there are some areas where you just step on a different path and you just have this different feeling. And it's hard to really describe in words other than it feels ancient. It feels like there's something significant there, and maybe it is a sacred space. And you know, the box graves, wow. I didn't even think about that. It kind of makes me think over on like Bell's Bend and even the west side of town. And even if you go out a little more west, and there's the hill mounds out on Harpeth. So yeah. It's an interesting area.
But you kind of felt like there was almost something like watching you from above, kind of like something that was like an overlord that was kind of observing you in a way.
Oh God. Well, we have this. So my boyfriend and I are really entertaining people. Well, I'll just give you an idea of the cheesy joke we always have. We always say, close the blinds so the reptilians can't look in and see us. You know. And so what that joke is actually referring to is that feeling where we go outside and we're an object of observation. And yeah, it felt more celestial, like it was from above and impressing downwards on us.
Yeah. Right.
Pretty spooky.
Yeah, that's crazy. Well, you know, like I was just thinking about that today, and just like, you said this was in February of this year, correct?
2019.
2019.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Still, though, it's like that feeling of foreboding, and you kind of look at everything that's been happening, especially lately, especially with after we had that tornado here. You know,
yeah.
When I read that, I was kind of like, interesting kind of bit of foreshadowing. So you've been working with the Liminal Earth crew, and then you also have kind of your own business, I guess, doing tarot readings and all kinds of interesting things like that, which I want to get into a little bit with you. But I just kind of want to get your background, like, you know, so I guess that you consider yourself a witch or Wiccan, or what do you consider yourself in that spectrum?
Yeah, I consider myself a witch, I guess.
Okay.
It's even weird, almost like announcing it or declaring it to the world, because
right.
It just feels like what I do is I celebrate nature, I celebrate the seasons, and I know that the world around me is full of life and energy and spirit. So I guess that's the definition of a witch. A Wiccan, Wicca, is actually considered a modern day religion. So it's an actual religious practice.
Okay.
Whereas anybody can be a witch. But there's no like religious tradition with it. I guess that's the best way I could describe it. People talk about this all the time. What's the difference between a pagan, a Wiccan, and a witch? And a pagan is kind of this like umbrella term for people who celebrate probably pre-Christian mythology and religious beliefs and ceremonies and systems. And a Wiccan is somebody who takes that, but it's like a religious practice where, you know, some Wiccans, I think there are solitary Wiccans, but whenever I think of a person that's celebrating Wicca, they tend to congregate with others in a coven to celebrate full moon, sometimes the new moon, but also the wheel of the year, or the 8 great holidays that I wrote about.
So you're more independent than you don't belong to any official or religious organization like Wicca or something? You kind of do your own thing.
I do my own thing, but I break bread with a Druidic group. So there is a Druidic group in Nashville, and I celebrate the holidays with them. So I guess that I would say that I'm a Druidic leaning witch.
Yeah.
Who celebrates the seasons and is just super chill. I don't know. I always used to call myself a bookworm witch because I love to read and cross-reference and study and kind of go down rabbit holes and find where, a certain topic will take me. I guess that's probably one of the best things I could, or I'd say like a seasonal witch, because I really love to flow with the cyclical nature of the seasons. And I tend to find that, my activities, my mood, my rituals, and just the way I feel also coincides with the seasons. Although right now, since we're all inside, I feel like I'm hibernating when it's really nice out and I should be outside.
I did kind of want to comment on that, because all the the maybe observances that you would do in this as we're really having spring right now, but we're all inside. Do you feel weird about that? Like, are you able to do the usual observations that you do throughout the year in springtime right now?
Yeah, actually I can. I think the one thing that I'm a little bummed out about is that I do love to go hiking, and this is a beautiful time of year to go hiking and looking for, I'm a spring flower nerd. Like, I love to look for different spring flowers. And so I'm a little bit limited because I just have my yard. I haven't ventured out on the trails because I actually heard that they're a little bit saturated because everybody's trying to escape their houses. Yeah. So I just thought, you know what, I could go to the forest when it's time. But you could celebrate and honor the seasons anywhere, and springtime and celebrating spring, I really think, I celebrate gardening this time of year, and my gardens are enormous right now. As a matter of fact, I have too many tomato seedlings. And so it is kind of interesting that even though I can't get out in the forest and I can't, go break bread with the Druids right now, I still can honor the fertility of the spring and the growth of life and the reemergence of life by just germinating seeds and, working with compost and, looking for spring flowers in my yard. I'm still able to enjoy that.
That's a good thing to focus on right now. I mean, because everyone, a lot of people are in such a dark place right now that to think about this rebirth is probably real positive.
Yeah, and I guess that's interesting, too, to think that this is happening in the spring. There is, when I think about the spring and the spring equinox and honoring, sort of the feeling of spring, I think about transformation and growth. And while this is a horrible thing, it's a pandemic, so it's not like walking through, the park, but there's some transformation happening on a greater scale. A lot of people are learning that their jobs really could be work from home jobs. A lot of people are feeling a lot more mellow and learning how to enjoy the quieter side of things. Nature is healing. Here in Nashville, something very peculiar happened. We were, because like I said, I'm always outside. So we were outside, and there were like a half a dozen bats like circling over our backyard, which I've never seen before. I'll see a couple bats flapping around every now and then, but to see this like whole, it was like a bat party. It's like something is reawakening. Some sort of creative thing is emerging from this experience. So maybe that's a positive way to look at it, or a positive spin on the events that we're going through.
I think with any kind of thing like this that's life-changing, epoch-changing, whatever you want to call it, I think that there's always a good side to it. I mean, I think that there could be a lot of changes coming from this, and there could be some positive stuff. It's just a thought.
Yeah, and I hope that there are some positive things. Some of the things that I really hope to see are people's celebration of the homestead, and of their family and their kin, and just kind of saying, this is what's important to me. And I think too that a lot of people, I'm like a homebody, with the exception of like kind of like going out in nature. So I'm pretty comfortable curling up with a book or cooking or meditating or just napping or just watching TV. But I feel like there are a lot of people that are really, extroverted and stir crazy, and they're like, I just need to get back out. I need to go to a party. And I think that for them, this could be a really transformative moment where they, honor that inner work. We're inside, so we could go metaphorically inside as well.
Yeah. It has some introspection for a change. Yeah. There could be so much that good that does come out of this. So it's not all a bad thing. I mean, we're going through a traumatic time right now, but that's how these things work, essentially, is that there comes a point where like something makes us say, okay, maybe what we were doing before isn't the right way, or maybe the way that we lived before wasn't right. I could see that happening. You see that happening all throughout history.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, people are really reevaluating who are valuable members of our society. Maybe we think about those Amazon workers totally differently now, or those people that ring up our groceries and stock our shelves, or even our doctors, so we get to really see who those valuable people are in our community. And hopefully that means that we'll give them the praise and the support that they deserve.
Yeah. So you also do tarot, as I understand it. And I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on this. We've talked about tarot before on the show, but to kind of just get your perspective, for me, I've had my tarot read quite a few times. I've done readings. I have a good friend that she does it, and she's actually been on this show. And it's interesting. I've had some really profound experiences, especially in the last year, with something that happened with me. But I still wonder if there's like do you think that there's more like a supernatural thing with tarot, or do you feel like it's more of a psychological effect for a person?
I think it could be a little bit of both. And I also think it's really up to the person getting the reading. I think that the more open-minded a person is, and if a person really believes in ESP and psychic abilities, they tend to feel like they have these psychic and intuitive connections when they get a tarot reading. Somebody who comes in and maybe doesn't feel those same things, may see that it's more of a psychological experience. There are readers now who really try and focus in on having a tarot reading that connects to more of that psychological aspect, where we use the cards as tools to communicate psychological questions or messages or mantras. And that's really important too. For me, it's a little bit of both. I tend to think that I have a little clairaudience in me. I don't promote myself as like some sort of like incredible, psychic that's going to give you lottery numbers and, tell you the name of your great aunt's, dog or something like that. But for me, there are those supernatural experiences where I will look at a card and I hear something and I relay that message and it clicks with the client. And there are times where I put the cards down and I look at them maybe once, and then I just look up and I talk to the client, where it's almost like a channeling experience where you're really truly downloading something that's above and beyond just wanting to get on a soapbox.
And the cards are just
So,
kind of like a conduit for that, or it's just like tuning in from the cards to
yes,
something else.
absolutely. I met, let me see if I could see his book. I met an author, and he wrote a book called Hidden Wisdom. I don't remember his name right now. I met him a few years ago, and I told him I was a tarot reader. And it was interesting. He said to me something that still sticks with me to this day. He said, tarot are spiritual flashcards. And so I think of that. I do. The tarot is a tool to help you relay those spiritual, profound messages. They can really be life-changing in many ways. I think if you're really open to having that kind of experience. And I don't think it's just up to the person giving the tarot reading, but the person sitting down has to recognize that it's an even exchange and that they have to be open and accepting. When people sit down with their arms crossed and say that they don't believe in tarot, kind of my response is, well, tarot doesn't believe in you. It's meant to be, it's kind of like if you went to a psychologist and said, I don't feel like talking, or you went to a doctor and you said, guess what's wrong with me? You're not going to get much out of the experience.
Right. So tarot is just one of many divination techniques, and you have a whole book called A Curious Future, a handbook of unusual divination and unique oracular techniques, where you explore like all these different ways of divination.
Yes. So there are so many different forms of divination. Honestly, I think that you could divine with anything. Divination is just one of these practices that has been with humanity since the rise of civilization. I think about, the creation of astrology, all the way to people, scrying, which is, when they gaze into like a crystal ball, or golly, what else? People reading the way smoke rises up from incense. There's always been this desire to know what is going to happen in the future. And humans are very creative. We have found a variety of methods for predicting the future, some of which are, very complex systems, such as reading tarot or astrology, and some that are a little bit simpler, like looking up and going, this cloud looks like this shape, therefore I believe this is the omen or the message. So anybody could do divination.
What are some of the techniques that you use? Is there anything besides tarot that you particularly like to use as a divination technique?
Good question. I am looking around my living room right now. I'm like, what do I have that I like to use? So one thing that I enjoy using is a pendulum, which is this, it's basically a weighted object on the end of a string or a chain. The most simple way people maybe historically created a pendulum was by using a needle and thread. But you'll see today, like if you go into a metaphysical shop or a new age store, they have these pendulums that almost looks like a cone-shaped crystal on the end of like a sterling silver chain. And you hold the top of the chain and you let the weighted object, the crystal at the bottom of the pendulum, kind of sit and it moves in a specific direction to indicate a specific answer. So for example, it might spin clockwise to give you the answer yes, and it might spin counterclockwise to give you the answer no. And so I think there's a pendulum in just about every room in this house. Both my boyfriend and I love using pendulums, so we have them everywhere. I studied runes as well, very, very extensively at a very young age. By young age to me, I mean like 19, 20, I was already kind of like, ooh, I really want to study this. So for some reason, I think runes are very profound. I don't do a full reading with them, but it's basically an ancient Scandinavian Norse alphabet. and each letter represents a specific thing. And so I have this little kit of runes, and those little letters are carved on deer antler. Now, some people will have runes and they're painted on stones or carved into wood. So it just, it varies from person to person. And so every now and then I'll pull one rune for myself and kind of think about that and what the meaning of that rune could be.
You also,
I think that those are probably my favorites.
you also mentioned in the book, going along with the runes, you mentioned an alphabet called, I'm probably going to butcher this, Ogam, Ogam. Is that how you pronounce it?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, it looks like Ogam, but I think it's pronounced Om or Ogam.
Okay.
It really depends on who you ask, and also too, holding no judgment, because I butcher words all the time. And the one thing I always tell myself, and I saw this, I don't know, maybe somebody tweeted it, where, if somebody pronounces a word wrong, don't judge them, because they learned it from reading it, not from hearing it. But yeah, and I'll say Ogam for now, just because it's spelled Ogham, the Ogam alphabet. It's based on, basically, I guess I would call it, would say that it's Celtic in tradition. It's sort of this complex system that's been researched and reinterpreted by druids, witches, academic professors, historians, and mythologists. And so I'm actually looking at my book right now to share with you a little bit more information. But basically, these inscriptions of this isabet, they appear on place markers and stones in Ireland, Scotland, Wales, the Isle of Man, in England. And it's interesting, like if you look at the symbols themselves, they aren't like very eloquent or ornate. It's basically like these lines. And it makes sense to me, and it's the same with the runes too. They're very, very simple shapes because they're easy to carve. But the Ogam are based on trees, and I think there are a couple, like maybe like flat, like honeysuckle is in there. I don't know if you'd call honeysuckle a tree or not, or an invasive weed. I guess it depends on your personality. But basically, each of the interpretations of those letters are based on the mythology and stories of different trees. It's just really pretty. It's really good for people who are like tree huggers and into Celtic traditions and yeah, it's really beautiful. Maybe lesser known than rune.
What about bone casting? You ever done any of that?
I've studied it a lot, and I have my own set. It's not completely finished. So the interesting thing is that bone throwing is really, really beautiful. And some people will create a very extensive set with bones, and they'll use bones from maybe, trying to think of this, like there's a place in town called Hale. You guys know Hale. And you could probably get like collected bones, that were ethically sourced there, maybe. I don't know what they have. I know that they have like, what are those when they stuff birds? What is that called when they do that? They put a
taxidermy.
Yeah, taxidermy.
I do taxidermy. I'm trying to think about like where you find bones, and like there are actually people that sell bones, whether for divination or it's because they like taxidermy. Some people will find bones in the woods. Like I didn't take one, but like, for example, like I saw, I don't know, it was like a fox that had passed away, and like some of the bones were showing. I'm sure that if somebody felt comfortable with it, they might do that. I don't think I would. But there are also people that just use chicken bones, and so they actually literally like will use bones that they've collected from different meals, I guess. And obviously you go through a process to sterilize and clean them, and bleach them so they're bright and white, and then cast the bones. So when you cast the bones, you throw them commonly on like a cloth. Sometimes it will have different symbols on it. Sometimes it will just mark different quarters, and then interpret the way they fall. I have a set of bones that I've collected. There was actually somebody at a pagan festival I went to that was selling bones just for that reason. But my bone set also has some ancestral things in it. So like a button that was from my grandmother's, jewelry box, and like a stone that somebody got for me when they were in Oregon, and there's a tooth in mine, and so like when people are casting things or throwing objects, some people will stick very, very definitively to a traditional system, and then some people will be creative and maybe feel inspired to do something a little bit unique. I've seen people throw crystals. I've seen people throw trinkets. And just, basically they create the reading by giving an interpretation or a fortune to each of the trinkets or the bones or the objects.
You've also got another book out called 8 Extraordinary Days. And this one is, as you kind of mentioned it a little bit just a little earlier, but this one is about like the pagan holidays. And what was the kind of what was your purpose in kind of writing this book? What kind of inspired you to write a book about these? It's like, and it's kind of it's an interesting book because it's like kind of a self-help. It's like a guide to celebrating these holidays and then the traditions around the holidays. So kind of go into that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So this is the fun thing about 8 Extraordinary Days. Right now, it's actually getting this huge revision because it's going to be published by Which Way. Sometime at the end of the year. Everything's delayed now because of what's going on in the world.
Right.
But it is such a topic that's near and dear to my heart that I decided to go through and revisit the writing and kind of clean it up a little bit. This was self-published, so I'm really excited to have it going through a publisher. And the reason I wrote it is because honestly, it feels almost like my own personal book of shadows, or like my collection of my studies and personal celebrations and personal interests and how I enjoy each of the holidays.
Explain the Book of Shadows concept, what that is, because there might be some people that don't know.
Sure. So a Book of Shadows, I think like probably the highest level to describing a Book of Shadows. A Book of Shadows is a collection of sacred texts, research, knowledge, magic, journaling that a person collects that represents their beliefs, their practices, their studies. So a Book of Shadows may have somebody's magical spells, or somebody's, they make a potion, to bring in money, and they write down the recipe because it might do really well, and they could revisit it and make it again for a friend. It might have rituals, and it might have, everything that they do to honor their spirituality. For some, again, Book of Shadows can be a very, very traditional book. In some Wiccan traditions, like there's a coven, especially in ones that celebrate in groups of covens, a Book of Shadows can be this very, very sacred text where it just has rituals in it. But I think of a Book of Shadows as a working journal for a magical person, or somebody who, is a witch and just wants a place to compile all of their musings.
It has that real personal element to it.
Oh, for sure. It's personal, and you'll find that some people, are very, very private about their Book of Shadows, and then some people are really picky about what they put in their Book of Shadows. There are some Book of Shadows within groups and covens where you can't read it until you have been with the group for a year and a day, or, it varies from person to person. For me, obviously, I think that celebrating the seasons and the cycle of nature is so valuable that, I'm happy to share with the world what I'm fond of meditating on during different, times of the calendar.
Okay. Yeah. I was just curious what that term meant, as far as like Book of Shadows. So what are some of your favorite holidays? Like, which ones do you feel like that are interesting to you to celebrate? Are there some that are more, I guess, important to you than others?
Probably my favorite holidays in the Wheel of the Year. So in the wheel, when I say the Wheel of the Year, that is basically a term that was coined to almost imagine a wheel with 8 spokes on it. And it's meant to be this sort of like visual to make you think about like, a wheel, it's a cycle. And each of those spokes is a holiday that coincides when there's an astronomical event happening, and then the places in between those. So, for example, there is the summer solstice, which happens usually between June 19th and June 23rd. And then there is the autumnal equinox, which happens usually between September 19th and September 23rd. By the way, this is for the Northern Hemisphere. But there's also these cross-quarter, these holidays that happen in between those solar events. And for some reason, those are the ones that I tend to be drawn to a little bit more. Maybe it's because they're in between times, and because they're a little bit, Samhain, which is spelled differently, it's spelled Samhain, is probably one of the most well-known holidays that, depending on who you talk to, is on October 31st or November 1st or both or all of October. But it tends to coincide with the celebrations of Halloween. So it's the Witches' New Year. It's considered to be probably the most well-known and one of the biggest festivals of the whole year. Because I work as a tarot reader, I tend to not celebrate Samhain because Halloween is my busiest time of the year.
I'm sure. Yeah.
It's bananas. It's just one party after another. People would just want readings during October. I don't blame them. I want readings all the time, but, I guess most people don't work that way. But for me, I think my favorite holidays are the ones that are less advertised. They're the ones that are a little bit more mellow, a little bit more quiet, and maybe people feel a little unsure about what to do during them. And I like it for that reason because, like I was saying earlier, like I'm a homebody, and so I like those kind of like homebody holidays. So one that just passed by is called Imbolg or Imbolg or Imbolc.
Yeah,
So
I had no idea about that one. That one was super interesting to me.
It's really, I call it the introvert's holiday. That is, it's on February 1st. Again, that's in the Northern Hemisphere. And it's really this quiet holiday, but it's almost when the earth starts waking up again. You start to get those tiny hints that spring is around the corner. And the word Imbolg actually means in the belly. And it refers to, is it sheep or calves? I think it's both. Basically, barn animals are pregnant and they're starting to have milk. And so there's this feeling in the air when we get to February that maybe spring is coming back. Maybe we can be hopeful that there's, life again. And I also think it's interesting too, because in about February, I start thinking, oh God, I have to start doing my plants. I have to start gardening. So really it's like this preparation for spring, but it also is this deep celebration of creativity and inspiration and just quietness. and I love quiet. So it's just this very, very peaceful holiday. And it's also a holiday connected to milk. And so there's lots of cheese to be eaten.
Okay.
You can never go wrong with
I can
that.
get with that.
A cheese eating holiday is a good thing. And then probably my other favorite holiday happens in August, and it's called Luagna. And I've always liked that. It's August 1st. And I've always enjoyed that one because it kind of coincides with, like, it makes me think about like my childhood and going to state fairs. And I'm from the Northeast, so I went to the Big E, and it was like this agricultural fair, but you ate like fried dough, and they celebrated the harvest. And so this holiday is really profound to me because as somebody who likes to garden, and I also love to eat, it's a wonderful holiday that celebrates sort of like this bounty in the garden, this bounty in the world. We celebrate abundance. But not only that too, it's a day of playfulness. People can, it's meant to be a playful day where people go outside. I don't know. I think that those are probably my two favorite. Do you guys have a favorite?
As far as like holidays, like
Yeah.
probably really.
You can give it the Christian name, Adam.
Yeah.
Well, probably really lately. I mean, I enjoy like just Christmas time. I mean, that sounds pretty cliche, but just like around that time period is really enjoyable, and not for like the reasons of like, you know, you get to buy stuff or you get presents. Like I'm way past that point in life. I just enjoy the time. I just like it because it feels like things are getting a little bit slower, and you kind of hang out with your family and enjoy yourself. Like, you know, it's a time that I personally enjoy. So I guess that would be more like Yule, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's around the winter solstice. And it's that cozy, homey feeling of just, you know, getting together and being comfortable with the people you love, and being able to enjoy tradition. And so it is kind of interesting. A lot of times people will always like to point out that the Christian calendar sort of mimics ancient pagan holidays. And that a lot of the things that you know were celebrated by those heathens, you know, the Christians, or you know, the Christian church kind of tried to find the holiday around their holidays to try and convert those people. And so, yeah, maybe Yule or those celebrations connected with the winter solstice, and you know, that rebirth of the Sun King and the Sun God. You know, wow, perfect time to have Christ be born.
Mm-hmm. Right. I would say mine would have to be old Sam Hain.
Yes.
It's a pretty exciting. You definitely do get a charge in the air around that time. Really, October is just a wonderful month to begin with.
Absolutely.
That's like one of the best months of the year, as far as like, at least here in this part of the country. It's really nice, and you get a good feeling in the air, and there's a lot going on, and usually, so.
For sure.
What do you think is like, what are the holidays? Can you kind of go down the list of them a little bit? Like what, and like the time of the year, because I think that's important to understand it, kind of like, cause it's a pagan calendar, but it's also an agricultural calendar if you really think about it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, spot on. Exactly. So I'm trying to think about where to start. I mean, traditionally people start with Samhain, which is that Halloween one, but why don't we start with kind of what we just passed, you know, chronologically. The spring equinox, some people call it Ostara, and the spring equinox, obviously that happens in March. I don't know, like March 20th, 21st. I can't remember what day it happened this year. Yeah, all the last month is kind of blended together into one day. I have no idea what time zone I'm in anymore. But the spring equinox is this time where we celebrate the rebirth of nature. Everything's turning green again, and we can start, you think agriculturally, like you're starting to get those greens back in your garden, and you could eat that lettuce that's and those radishes and the asparagus, those first foods of spring, which must be nice, because if you think about it, maybe, in times before we had our greens shipped to us from greenhouses in tropical regions, we had to rely on what was in our pantries. And probably by the beginning of March, you were pretty bare, so I think that the spring equinox must have been a really relieving time where things were warm and you could really, enjoy the growth of life again, and kind of just be hopeful, like, oh my God, we could put seeds in the garden and we'll actually have cucumbers. Yeah. Kind of this great feeling. The next holiday that comes up is called Beltane, and that happens on May 1st. It's really, to me, it's a very woodsy, very, very green holiday that really celebrates the lushness of nature. We're really, really thriving outside. Everything is growing. A lot of people consider it a fertility holiday. It's very fertile. The world is fertile at this time. I think of the maypole. That might be something that comes to mind when people think of Beltane. The next one is the summer solstice, which happens in June, and some people call that Litha. And that is a holiday that is just bright and sunny. It's when our sun is the strongest. So again, we're celebrating that life force outside. But one of the fascinating things that I love about Litha, and a lot of people will say it about Beltane in May as well, is that those are two holidays that are associated with fairies, and kind of having these interactions with the fairies, and having this closeness to the other world and the nature spirits. And so, there are lots of stories about fairies, kind of like being out and about during this time of year. And then there's Lagnassad in August, which we talked about, which is kind of like this, I consider it almost like a holiday where we're practicing gratitude. There's this feeling of renewal with people around us. And then in September, we celebrate the autumnal equinox, which to some people consider the autumnal equinox as the pagan Thanksgiving. And so this is a time where really, like, our gardens are overflowing with food and abundance. And it's a time we give gratitude, because it's also that wheel is turning, and all of a sudden that abundance and that fertility and that life force and that strong sun is kind of fading at the autumnal equinox. After the autumnal equinox, all of a sudden the days start getting shorter. And so then we get into the end of October, the beginning of November, and there's the celebration of Samhain, which tends to coincide with Halloween. And that's really the time where they say, like, that they call it the veil between our world and the other world is thin. And this is really considered to be the final harvest. It's truly like the last time that you everything that's left in your garden you bring in, because after Samhain, you leave it to the land. And there's actually, this belief that these little fairies come and spoil them, and you leave what's left for the fairies outside. And that transitions into your favorite, Christmas, which is, Yule in our world, and coincides with the winter solstice. So the joy of the winter solstice is that it's all about hope, even though it's cold out there. It's dark. There's this celebration that even though it is the shortest day of the year, from here on out, every day is going to get just a little bit longer. The light's going to be with us a little bit longer. And that's when we get to Imbolg, which is one of my favorites, in February. And then
that's roughly what
the
date?
wheel
It's
has
like
turned.
February 14th is like kind of the same as like Valentine's Day and Lupercalia around that time.
It's a little bit different. It's a little bit. Lupercalia. I don't know if modern witches celebrate Imbolg in the same way as maybe the ancient Romans celebrated Lupercalia. If they did, they may be on an episode of Cops.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But Imbolg is traditionally celebrated on February 1st. Some people will celebrate it on the 2nd or 3rd. And some people will even go as far as to kind of pinpoint those cross-quarter holidays by the exact time in between the solar holidays. So, for example, Imbolg in February should be celebrated on the day that's exactly in between the winter solstice in December and the spring equinox in March. So,
okay. So there's no like kind
really,
of like definitive date of it.
It really just depends on your tradition and your belief system and your own opinion. When I look at the holidays, I think of them as something that is a vibe that lasts more than just one definitive day or definitive moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like he was talking for Christmas and Halloween, everything around there.
Sure.
Something interesting, because we're talking about some of the excesses we know of ancient Roman times and stuff because they're well preserved. But this idea that on some of these holidays you have this release of social constraints, or you have a leveling of the previous like caste or class system, or even in some of the Saturnalia stuff we read about of, you know, the masters serving the servants and things like this. And what do you think about that kind of stuff? And is that something that we definitely don't have as much, but might have really contributed to more stability in a lot of older orders? Wow,
that's something to meditate on. The Lord, is it the Lord of Misrule?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
The Lord of Misrule.
Me and Adam were down in Florida, and we didn't know it was 12th night, and we were just walking around Pensacola.
Yep.
And saw all this stuff, and we were like, what's going on? Because we were just thinking, you know, we didn't really grow up with like Mardi Gras stuff. And we saw the king and queen of Mardi Gras being crowned with like the Knights of Columbus standing around and everything, and just like full regalia. But then that led me to learn about that stuff, the Lord of Misrule. And actually, I got the baby in the king cake on Mardi Gras. So I'm hoping that hoping I don't get sacrificed as the Lord of Misrule, you know, but at least I'll have a good year. I guess.
Yeah, you know, I think that in general, holidays are special because they pull us in the present moment. They allow us the opportunity to observe the world around us, and they permit us a time to relax and take a load off. But, you know, it is interesting that you mentioned that too. You know, what if there was the switching of roles? Yeah, that might be interesting if something was. Do we do that at all anymore? Makes me think of like makeover shows, like reality TV, where I think that modern day humans would benefit from celebrating holidays outside of, you know, just reverence for the commercial and the capital.
Yeah. No doubt. We're kind of we're really disconnected from the roots of these holidays, and we're really just kind of we just think of them as like, oh, you know, it's Easter, oh, it's Christmas, you know, it's time to do this, it's time to do that. We don't really get. I don't think a lot of people really get why these holidays are important, because they're all about, well, like I said, the agricultural calendar, but also, you know, the rotation of the earth, at least in the northern hemisphere, where most people have lived for centuries and centuries, and that just how important the solstices and the equinoxes, and like it's all based around the solstices and the equinoxes, but also I find it fascinating that it's also based around the midpoint in a solstice, or the midpoint between a solstice and an equinox, and midpoints as well, like Walpurgis Nacht and
that's right.
Yeah, Beltane. And also, like Halloween is the same. Is the same way. I mean, All Souls Day, all that kind of stuff is all based around that.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too. There's always this sort of belief that those in between times, those thresholds, they unlock this access to otherworldly possibilities, to magic, to supernature. It's almost like there's this feeling of like you could put your foot in two different worlds, which is almost why I wrote that thing that I did, going full circle back to what we were saying. I thought it was interesting that I had that experience of stepping outside my front door in pretty urban Nashville and feeling like I stepped into another world. Yeah.
Do you feel like
those times are important?
Do you feel like with that experience, do you feel that there was a kind of fae kind of aspect to that, like the fairy realm, the high strangeness kind of aspect?
Gosh, that's actually a loaded question, because there's some people that think that the fae, are God, like modern day abductions and Bigfoot sightings are actually the fae, or the fae are actually Bigfoot and aliens.
There's a lot of correspondence between them.
Yeah,
that's
interesting. There
interesting.
sure is, and there's this overlay between the two. I've always been intrigued by the fae, the good folk, the other company, the fairy, however they choose to be addressed. I've always been intrigued by them because I had those encounters, and I definitely have those encounters in my dreams. And whenever I've had those encounters, they've been really, really positive and very, good vibration kind of feelings, and I didn't feel that way when I walked out my door that February evening. That being said, if we look at older stories about fairies, they aren't just, Tinkerbell. It isn't just this like sweet little pixie winged creature that is beautiful and benevolent. It's not all, they're not all Galadriel and Rivendell. I wish they were. I mean, I wish they were. And maybe they are if that's what you need to see or that's what you need to perceive. But if you look at ancient stories of fairies, they could be pretty horrific, and there could be instances where they don't have the best of intentions toward humans. They want to cause mischief. Absolutely,
mischief,
yeah.
Trickster. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's a lot of mischief. That you think of things of, you always hear about them braiding the hair of horses, or spoiling food, or there are some cases where they abduct babies, or they make people go blind, or they'll kidnap people and not let them go back. And time in the world of fairy is not like time as humans have defined it. So, it's been said that people step into the world of fairy and they think they've spent one night there, but they come back to the world and 200 years have passed. So it's pretty interesting stuff, both good and bad.
Yeah. It's like it's like the missing time phenomenon and all that. There's a book coming out soon about Bigfoot sightings, or about the Bigfoot folklore that our good friends Timothy Renner and Joshua Cutchin are working on. And it's going to tie in some of this kind of fairy lore stuff to even like cryptids and Bigfoot. So,
and if you're interested in the fae lore, definitely check out some of Joshua Cutchin's books, because he gets really deep into it.
Yeah.
I'm writing his name down now, because it's all we're really coming towards that time in the calendar where I start thinking about the fairy being alive and celebrating all the flowers in my garden. I'm reading a lot about fairies, so I'm also going to read about Bigfoot this year too. So
Cool.
maybe he's a green man of some kind. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's a lot to that. Spirit of the woods. Yeah.
The wild man. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's another aspect of it, and that fits straight in with like fairy lore. So like you kind of with all your you come from a more kind of like the Celtic tradition, because a lot of the holidays you're describing are more from the old Celtic tradition, and the whole idea of the fae folk and all this kind of stuff more stems from the British Isles.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. That's definitely my foundation. It's what I was drawn to. It's what I love. And like I said, I break bread with the Druids. It's what I studied. I studied Celtic mythology, and then I went and I got my master's in medieval English and focused on Arthurian legend. I also I like to call it, like, I give my shout outs. I give my love and my honor to Norse, because I did a lot of Norse mythology and I did a lot with Icelandic sagas in my studies. And then my personal roots, I'm mostly Italian. So sometimes I start to study, ancient Rome and ancient Greek, but for the most part, the Celtic tradition is where I tend to be most intrigued.
You write about in 8 Extraordinary Days about Hecate, and I got to talk to you about this because this goddess has come up a lot on the show, primarily because of Walter Bosley and his work. What is the association between like the concept of witchcraft and Hecate?
Oh, well, I will tell you, first of all, and I'm going to give this sort of like precursor, my connection with divinity and deity is probably different from maybe somebody that follows very, very traditional paths. So I don't have like big altars, and, I work with them because I feel like they visit me, or I feel their energy comes to me through different circumstances and divination. And there was a very long period of time in my life where I would go into meditation, and in my meditation, I would constantly find myself like walking into stormy, dark weather. It wasn't like it was bad weather. It was just like a gloomy, warm feeling. And I would encounter this woman, and I really felt that she was Hecate. It was like I would encounter her in these meditations. And so it was almost like a meditative encounter that I had with her. But in terms of her history, she's just, this extensive history. I'm going to open up to some of my notes on her because she's really a goddess of witchcraft. So she sometimes is associated with being a crone goddess, and that means that when people think of her, they think of her representing sort of the aged aspect of a woman's life, like a woman in her latter years. And I think it's important to recognize that Hecate wasn't necessarily always just a crone goddess or just associated with this older goddess. She's a goddess associated with death, regeneration, magic. It was believed that she ruled over the sky, the sea, and the earth. She is celebrated for helping people with divination and with their spell work. And she's also associated with herbalism, with just about everything. She's also obviously associated with the underworld as well. So, she's a loaded topic, and I feel like that for me, she's somebody that I'm constantly learning about as well. I took this incredible course on Hecate at Hexfest in Louisiana. I'm trying to find the name of the writer because she wrote this incredible book. Her name's Sarita Deste, And she talked about Hecate as being this torchbearer and being this goddess of the serpent and knowledge. And so truly, like, Hecate is just this powerful goddess that just embodies empowerment through magical manifestation, through healing work, through the other world. She's really powerful, and she's really, really powerful right now. A lot of people are drawn to her, and she's a very powerful figure.
She shows up pretty prominently in the work of one of our guests that we've had on, Walter Bosley, in a series that he wrote that's a nonfiction series called Empire of the Wheel, Wheel. And it's kind of like, since then, kind of been fascinated with the concept of her and some of the symbolism that's involved with her, like dogs and owls, and the idea that she's a chthonic deity, so that she's kind of a possibly older than probably one of the oldest gods you could possibly have. So something that like probably stretches way back into the primeval world.
It's like she's the original Slayer. Like, it makes me think of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and they go back in time, that episode where, Buffy goes back and meets the original Slayer. Yeah, maybe Hecate truly is that. She really embodies, that feminine aspect of divinity. Yeah. And and it's interesting too that she keeps on kind of like getting downplayed and getting smaller and smaller bit parts until she's finally confined to being sort of this like lady, of the underworld. And she's so much more than that. There's so much more. She, and for me personally, with my sort of meditative encounters with her, her influence is massive.
Yeah, no, absolutely, no doubt. You mentioned some of your paranormal experiences. We should talk about this.
Sure.
So you said you really haven't had any here, but I guess growing up and such, you had some. Have you kind of? Do you pick up on those things more than other people?
Well, yeah, and I should also say too, for a very, very short stint, I was on a paranormal research team in Tennessee.
Oh, okay.
And I wish that I was more honed in with my mediumship abilities, but I just don't. It's just not my calling. It's just not my strength. So I've kind of had almost like, I'll call it like really not forced, but instigated paranormal activities here by going into investigation. But things that happen just kind of naturally, like the bumps in the night, happened to me when I was a lot younger. It is kind of weird that it's almost though my shift, I had a shift in what I paid attention to. So maybe when I lived up in the Northeast, I felt this connection to the ancient spirit there, or the historical spirit, and looked for those ghosts, looked for those paranormal actions or experiences. And then I moved here and I became really, really immersed in the idea of feeling the energy of place. And so, like when I say like Shelby Bottoms, when you go on this specific trail, it's really muddy, but it feels different. That's kind of what I'm looking for is where there are these pockets of really good energy that feel old and ancient. But, yeah, I've definitely had all sorts of paranormal experiences. Everything from I have had a fairy encounter to having seen full body apparitions. I'm trying to think of something I could tell you. But of course, like I'm trying to think of something that happened to me in Tennessee, and the only thing that's coming to my head is that my butt was pinched by a ghost. The only thing that's coming to my mind right now, I was in investigation and just out of the middle of nowhere was like, oh my God.
Where did that happen?
It happened at a person's house out
Okay.
in East Tennessee. So I'm not going to give, too much away, but this person's house was really interesting in terms of having a lot of activity, but it was almost like and I feel this way about East Tennessee going through Virginia and West Virginia. There's something in the woods that looks back at you. And it felt that way out in East Tennessee to me at that investigation. It wasn't necessarily just like, the ghost of somebody who lived in the house beforehand, but there's something about the land.
What was the fairy experience? We got to talk about that. That's
sure. Yeah, I've always loved fairies. I don't know why, and not necessarily just like I don't have like a Tinkerbell tattoo or anything like that, but just the idea of this, I don't know, a race, a collective of spirit that we don't see, but might be living just in another dimension on top of ours. This idea that there's stuff that's just beyond our sight. And I've always loved the tales of the world of the fairy being this beautiful, everlasting, youthful, healthy, sunny place of enchantment. There's something that feels good about that. But I remember when I was, I started to come into all of this stuff, like studying witchcraft, studying tarot, studying all of this kind of like really supernatural, high strangeness, magical, esoteric, occult stuff. Like I got into it really young because I was drawn to it and very curious. I remember I had a book report on witchcraft in 9th grade. So I was always like even young, kind of pulled into this. And one of those young summers, I was probably like either 12 or 13, maybe 14. I grew up in this beautiful rural neighborhood in Connecticut. And my mother, I remember one day she was complaining about mowing the lawn. And I said, just let it grow natural. I don't know, just like this little hippie thing. I was like, just let it grow. And so she did. The backyard became this like almost this like valley of wildflowers and butterflies and bees. And at this time in my life, I started reading about, how there's this belief that if you leave little offerings to fairies, they'll look at you kindly and they'll be good to you. They won't, be mischievous. You'll have a good reputation with the fairy. And some of these offerings include honey and cream, and some people leave candy or even like mead or whiskey. And so in my young age, I, probably around Beltane or Letha, I went outside and I left. I remember I had like Barbie stuff. Like I had like Barbie dishes.
okay.
like kids' toys, but I put cream and honey in them and I left them out for the fairies. I was like, this is for you. Happy being a fairy, whatever.
Yeah. You made an offering to the fairies.
I sure did. I really tried to. In this beautiful, lush, like green floral paradise that was our neglected black backyard. And one night I woke up to my feet getting tickled. And I had my own bedroom. We lived in the middle of it was the middle of the night. And I to this day can tell you, I remember the feeling of these like little, like pointy pressure, just like poking at my feet and tickling me. And while waking up, I must have kicked or like harumphed, like not happy that I was getting tickled. And I heard this very, very, very audible giggling. And it was like tiny giggles. It wasn't like, it was like a tee, like what you'd expect a little quirky Victorian pixie fairy to sound like giggling. And it was audible. It wasn't just in my head. It wasn't, like I was dreaming. I felt this pressure on my feet. I responded, and I heard this noise. And I always swore that it was my fairy encounter, growing up. And there have been times like that too, where it hasn't been as definitive to me, but I feel like I've had those encounters, and I dream about it a lot, dream about having encounters, dream about going to maybe what you'd call the other world, or, their paradise. And in the dreams, I always tell myself, like I'm lucid dreaming, I'll tell myself, I have to remember how to get here. And I wake up and I never know. So it's pretty fae-like in a way. So I don't know. I think that everybody has experiences like this too. And then also too, if people have cats, a lot of times you'll see cats like responding to something that's completely invisible. Maybe, you never know. Maybe it's a little house brownie teasing your cat.
Yeah, I have heard about that a lot. That's they'll look at things or like stare at the dogs will do it too, and like you don't know if they're picking up on something that is maybe in the environment that you just cannot see.
Yeah.
So
it's really fascinating. They definitely see stuff that we don't. And, I pay attention to my cats when they behave. And I think too, that we could, I think that no matter where you live, you could invite that energy into your life. You could live in the city. There's this book. I wish I could remember the name of the author, but he wrote this book at really the turn of the 20th century, and he lived in Edinburgh. So he was, having encounters with fairy in parks there. So I don't think that you just have to be in the middle of the forest or in a very rural place to have these experiences.
Yeah, agreed. I think that, I think what we're dealing with is something that is as old as the planet itself. Yeah. And that has been around and has many different guises. Like the whole fairy name is just another label for something that has been around. I mean, it just doesn't matter what you call them. You call them aliens or jinn or whatever. That it's just the I think the best term for them really is just the other. Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely intelligences here.
I totally agree with you, and I love how you label them the other. There's that belief that the fairy don't actually like being called fairy. So they tend to go by the fae, and then people will also spell it F-A-E instead of F-A-I. But people will call them the good folk, and I love that title, the other, and maybe it goes along with what you're saying. They don't want to be called fairies because they're not just fairies. They're something larger than that. There's something more significant. They represent something that goes beyond those boundaries.
Have you ever had any weird, like, synchronistic events?
I don't think so. I wish I did. I sign me up for a time slip. Like, I'm totally keen for it. The synchronicity, I don't think so. I think for me, I've experienced a lot paranormally, with seeing things, but I've never had any synchronicity events or any like missing. I may have had missing time once, but nobody believed me. The thing is I could look back on my life, and I think anybody could too, and they could think even as a young child where they had dreams or experiences. I remember when I was a little girl, I said to my mom, do you remember when we used to live on the farm together? I mean, that could have been a past life, recall. And my mom was like, well, we never lived on a farm. And so that was the end of that.
Yeah. And all those little things we dismiss, sounds we might hear, or things we might think we see, but just, I'm just,
Oh, it's nothing.
Who knows?
It's just a plane. And that's why I think that the Liminal Earth project is so valuable, because it allows us to sort of map out different things that are happening around us, to see maybe we could go scope out this area and see if we have an experience like that, or see if there's any trend. On the Liminal Earth map, somebody in Murfreesboro said that they encountered a enormous deer, which was like the coolest.
Oh yeah, I read that one. Yeah.
I was calling it Big Hoof.
Yeah. Starting something now.
A giant deer. So now I'm going to be like hiking through Murfreesboro looking for giant deer.
Well,
so
see,
I think that's valuable.
That's another thing that comes up. Deer come up a lot in the alien abduction stuff too, because you got like
Really?
the screen memories. People say that an owl was looking at them through the window. The main one is the owl. The owl is usually pretty key and pretty significant, but deer are the other one. People say that.
No, I'm sorry. What
see,
were you
deer
saying?
are like an unusually large deer or something like that. Yeah.
Wow. That's
So it's interesting.
fascinating.
It's interesting that he saw that.
Yeah, and traditionally, like if you look at like I'm thinking of like different Arthurian legends, or because I automatically I start going through like tales and Celtic tradition and Arthurian tradition, and the deer always seem to pop up when, especially if they're white, like a white deer. Oh man, like that there's fairies, that there's like some sort of shifty thing happening where you're going to encounter this otherworldly event. So there they are again. So they're still showing up as deer. That's interesting. That's interesting too. You said that about the owl, because I have like a couple owls tattooed on me. Like, what does this mean?
Yeah. Well, then there's the association of. There's a little bit of an association with more dogs, though, but association with Hecate with owls, because apparently she has these two little assistants, so there are these rather large owls, and it's pretty fascinating. Well, this has been really interesting, Kiki. We really are glad to have had you on. Where can people find out about you and find out what you're working on, and tell us, a little bit when these books are going to come back out?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, this has been so much fun talking with you guys. This has really been a treat, and I've taken notes too. So I'm going to be learning a little bit about the stuff you shared with me also. The books should be coming out maybe again around the end of the year, hopefully, as long as things keep moving. Unfortunately, there's just a delay because of what we're going through right now. But you can keep in touch with me by going to my website, kikidombrowski.com. And I'm not very active on social media. Like, I'm not really good at keeping up with it. But the place I'm most active is Twitter. And you can find me at Twitter at KikiD333.
Absolutely. Okay.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on with us. Stay on the line for us, Kiki. We're going to just close out this section. And guys, we'll be back on Conspirinormal. Welcome back to Conspirinormal, guys. And that was a rather interesting interview with Kiki Dombrowski. Really glad to have her, fellow person in Nashville. Right. So, we got to talk to her about all sorts of things tonight. Was there anything that kind of stood out to you in that interview?
It was just interesting to really get into some of the days and the cycles, and how of the solstices and equinoxes and the days in between, and how even if you're not in tune with this stuff, you're still pretty much living it. Even the economic cycle follows it now. So even though we're not an agricultural society, the economic cycle of what the weather causes people to do, and especially like Christmas, where everyone spends all their money and has this thing that's similar in a lot of ways to the old ways of what people would do, have feasts and things. So even if you're not tuned into it and the antiquity of it, you're still living it, even the most unaware people.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's just that kind of stuff always fascinates me. I've looked more and more into that over the last couple of years about the calendars and the different holidays that the ancient people had and how it's all revolves around the earth and the movement of the earth. I find that stuff really fascinating. And I also thought that when she talked about her kind of like paranormal experiences, especially that she's really into the fae folk stuff and looking into like, kind of the link between the high strangeness accounts and the other and the fae folk and all this kind of interesting material that was in there. So very glad to have her on. Probably at some point have her back and hopefully start a kind of like a correspondence with her. And that was interesting. It was kind of an interesting serendipity that we read that on the air, or so to speak, her little entry into Liminal Earth. So that Liminal Earth thing is really fascinating too, and it's a lot of fun to explore. So I think there's anything else to add. I think that's it. I think we'll call it. Serfiel, you can tell them what we're doing on Patreon and how to get there.
Well, we've been having an episode every week. I think the last week now you would have heard what we recorded tonight, which was a exploration of someone's personal paranormal songwriting.
Yep,
our friend
sure.
Joel.
Yep.
So you can check that out. But every week we've been bringing you cool stuff. We got two-part Echo the Dolphin extravaganza. That was real popular, and we hope to continue with themes and different specials. Let us know any kind of cool ideas you guys got you'd like us to see explore on there. We really appreciate our patrons.
Yeah, and at some point we'd like to do some kind of like virtual meetup if anybody is interested, and maybe we can use that as a show or put that up as on Patreon or just whatever. If any of our patrons are interested in doing that, hit us up, conspirinormal@gmail.com, or leave us a note on Patreon as well if you're interested. So I think that's it, guys. Next time, bring in some more interesting paranormal stuff to you during these crazy times that we are living in. And guys, we will be back on Conspirinormal.
If you would like to help the show, please consider becoming a Patreon at www.patreon.com/conspirinormal, or leave a one-time donation at conspirinormal.com. And please check out our YouTube channel, Conspirinormal Podcast.